Marcus Rivera had always been the type of kid who preferred shadows to spotlights. At 17, he stood barely 5'6", with a lean frame that made him look younger than his classmates at Jefferson High School. His quiet demeanor and habit of keeping his head down while walking through the hallways made him practically invisible to most students. But to Derek Walsh and his crew, Marcus might as well have had a target painted on his back. Derek was everything Marcus wasn't. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. His sandy hair was always perfectly styled, and his expensive clothes marked him as one of the popular kids whose parents donated generously to the school. Flanking him were his loyal followers, Tommy Chen, a stocky kid with small eyes and a permanent sneer, and Jake Morrison, whose red hair matched his hot temper. Together, they ruled Jefferson High's social hierarchy through intimidation and cruelty. Marcus had transferred to Jefferson just 2 months ago when his family moved across town. His father worked long hours at the auto shop, and his mother pulled double shifts at the hospital, leaving Marcus to navigate his new school environment alone. What none of his classmates knew was that Marcus had spent the last 8 years training in mixed martial arts at his old neighborhood's dojo. His sensei, Master Kim, had drilled into him the importance of discipline and using his skills only for protection, never aggression. A true warrior fights only when all other options are exhausted, Master Kim would say, and Marcus had taken those words to heart. The bullying started small. Derek would accidentally bump into Marcus in the hallway, sending his books scattering across the floor. Tommy would knock Marcus's lunch tray from his hands in the cafeteria, leaving him hungry and embarrassed as other students snickered. Jake would trip him on the stairs, causing Marcus to stumble and nearly fall down the concrete steps. Each incident was carefully orchestrated to look accidental to any teachers who might be watching, but Marcus knew better. "Watch where you're going, loser," Derek would mutter after each collision, loud enough for nearby students to hear, but quiet enough to avoid teacher attention. Marcus would simply gather his things and continue on his way, his jaw clenched, but his hands steady. He reminded himself of Master Kim's teachings about patience and control, even as his classmates whispered and pointed. The harassment escalated over the weeks. During gym class, Derek would accidentally slam into Marcus during basketball, sending the smaller boy crashing to the floor. In the locker room, Tommy would snap towels at Marcus's back, leaving red welts that Marcus had to hide under his shirt. Jake once poured chocolate milk over Marcus's head during lunch, claiming it was an accident when the lunch monitor looked over. "Maybe you should fight back," suggested Sarah Martinez, one of the few students who showed Marcus any kindness. She sat next to him in English class and had witnessed several of the incidents. "Standing there and taking it just makes them think you're weak." Marcus shook his head, wiping chocolate milk from his hair with a napkin. "Violence isn't the answer," he replied quietly, though his knuckles were white as he gripped the napkin. Inside, he could feel his training calling to him, the hours spent perfecting kicks and punches, the muscle memory that could drop Derek in seconds. But Master Kim's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that true strength came from restraint. The breaking point came on a particularly cold November afternoon. Marcus had stayed after school to make up a chemistry test he'd missed due to a dentist appointment. The hallways were mostly empty as he made his way to his locker to grab his jacket and backpack. He was focused on the combination lock, his fingers working the familiar sequence, when he heard the approaching footsteps. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Derek's voice echoed off the empty lockers. Marcus looked up to see the 3 bullies approaching, their faces lit with malicious grins. "Little Marcus all alone. Where are all your friends to protect you?" "I don't want any trouble," Marcus said evenly, continuing to pack his things. His training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, to assess threats without showing fear, but something felt different about this encounter, more dangerous, more calculated. "Trouble?" Tommy laughed, cracking his knuckles. We're not trouble. We're just having some fun, right, guys? Jake stepped closer, blocking Marcus's path to the exit. Yeah, fun. Speaking of which, we've been thinking you need to learn your place around here. New kids need to understand the pecking order. Marcus closed his locker and faced the three boys, his backpack clutched in his hand. I just want to go home, he said quietly. He could feel his heart rate increasing, his body naturally preparing for conflict, despite his mind's insistence on peace. Home? Derek stepped forward, his face twisted with cruelty. This is your home now, Marcus, and in this home, you follow our rules. Rule number 1, you don't get to just walk away when we're talking to you. Before Marcus could react, Tommy grabbed him from behind, while Jake seized his backpack. Derek smiled coldly as he opened one of the large gym lockers nearby, one of the old-style lockers that were taller and deeper than the regular ones. Rule number 2, Derek continued, is that new kids need to learn what happens when they don't show proper respect. Marcus struggled against Tommy's grip, his training finally kicking in as adrenaline flooded his system. But Jake had grabbed his arms from the front, and together the two boys overpowered him through sheer numbers rather than skill. They shoved him roughly toward the open locker. Stop, Marcus said firmly, his voice carrying a new edge that made Derek pause for just a moment. For the first time, there was something in Marcus's eyes that didn't look like fear. Something that made the three bullies exchange uncertain glances. But Derek's pride wouldn't let him back down now. Get him in there, he ordered. They forced Marcus into the locker, his knees pressed against his chest in the cramped space. Derek's face appeared in the opening, still wearing that cruel smile. Maybe a few hours in here will help you remember your place. Don't worry, someone will find you eventually. Probably. The door slammed shut with a metallic clang, and Marcus heard the unmistakable click of the combination lock being engaged. Their laughter echoed down the hallway as their footsteps retreated, leaving Marcus alone in the suffocating darkness. The first hour was the worst. Marcus's legs cramped painfully in the confined space, and the stale air made it difficult to breathe. He tried to remain calm, using the meditation techniques Master Kim had taught him, but panic clawed at the edges of his mind. The locker was completely dark, and the metal walls seemed to press in on him from all sides. He called out for help periodically, his voice echoing hollowly in the empty hallways. But the school was deserted except for a few teachers in meetings, and his cries went unheard. As the second hour passed, Marcus felt something changing inside him. The fear was still there, but it was being replaced by something else. A cold, focused anger that he'd never experienced before. By the third hour, Marcus's body had gone numb from the cramped position. His calls for help had become hoarse whispers, and the darkness seemed to press against his eyes like a living thing. But his mind was crystal clear now, running through every technique Master Kim had taught him, every combination and counterattack he'd practiced thousands of times. He thought about Derek's arrogant smile, Tommy's cruel laughter, Jake's satisfied smirk as they'd locked him away. The janitor found him just after 6 o'clock. Mr. Rodriguez had been making his evening rounds when he'd heard the faint tapping coming from the locker area. "Hello?" he'd called out, following the sound until he found the source. "Help!" Marcus had whispered through the metal slats. "I'm locked in here." Mr. Rodriguez quickly worked the bolt cutters he kept for emergency situations, snapping the lock and pulling the door open. Marcus tumbled out, his legs too numb to support him properly. The janitor helped him to his feet, concern written across his weathered face. "Dios mio, boy, how long have you been in there?" Mr. Rodriguez asked, steadying Marcus as blood flow returned to his legs. 3 hours, Marcus replied, his voice hoarse but steady. As feeling returned to his limbs, so did his anger. Not the wild, uncontrolled rage he might have expected, but something colder and more focused, something that his training could channel. "We need to call the police," Mr. Rodriguez said, reaching for his radio. "This is assault. Someone's going to jail for this." "No," Marcus said quickly, placing a hand on the janitor's arm. "Not yet. I need to handle this first." Mr. Rodriguez studied the boy's face and saw something there that made him pause. "Son, whatever you're thinking—" "I'm thinking about justice," Marcus interrupted, flexing his hands as full sensation returned. "Sometimes justice has to come before the law." The next morning, Marcus arrived at school early. He'd spent the evening stretching and working through his forms, preparing his body and mind for what was to come. He positioned himself near Derek's locker, knowing the bully's routine by heart after 2 months of observation. Derek arrived with his usual swagger, Tommy and Jake flanking him like faithful guard dogs. They were laughing about something, probably another student they'd humiliated, when Derek noticed Marcus standing nearby. "Well, look who crawled out of his hole," Derek said with a grin. "How was your time out yesterday, Marcus? Learn anything interesting?" Marcus stepped forward, and something in his posture made all 3 bullies take notice. He stood differently now, balanced, centered, with his weight evenly distributed. His hands hung loose at his sides, but there was something predatory in the way he moved. "I learned that you 3 are cowards," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly down the hallway. Other students began to stop and stare, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Derek's face flushed red. "What did you just call me?" "You heard me," Marcus replied calmly. "Cowards. It takes 3 of you to lock one person in a locker. That's not strength. That's weakness." A crowd was gathering now, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Sarah Martinez pushed to the front, her eyes wide with concern. Several seniors stopped on their way to class, their conversations dying as they sensed the tension in the air. Tommy stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "You want to say that again, freak?" Marcus turned to face him, and Tommy actually took a step back. There was something different about Marcus's eyes now. They held a confidence that hadn't been there before, a quiet certainty that made Tommy's bravado waver. "I said you're all cowards," Marcus repeated, his voice carrying to every corner of the growing crowd. "You pick on someone you think can't fight back. You attack in groups. You lock people in lockers and walk away laughing. That's not being tough. That's being pathetic." Derek's face was purple now. "You little freak, I'm going to—" "You're going to what?" Marcus interrupted, taking another step forward. "Lock me in another locker? Get your friends to hold me down? That's all you know how to do, isn't it? You've never actually fought anyone who could fight back." The crowd was getting larger now, with students pulling out phones to record what was obviously going to be a significant confrontation. Teachers would arrive soon, Marcus knew, but he needed this to happen first. Justice before intervention. Jake, apparently deciding that words were getting them nowhere, lunged forward with a wild haymaker aimed at Marcus's head. It was exactly the kind of sloppy, telegraphed attack that Master Kim had taught him to counter 1,000 times. Marcus stepped inside the punch, deflecting Jake's arm with his left hand while driving his right elbow into the bigger boy's solar plexus. Jake doubled over, gasping for breath, and Marcus followed up with a knee strike that sent him crashing to the floor. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. The crowd gasped, and Tommy rushed forward to help his friend. But Marcus was ready for him too. As Tommy charged, Marcus sidestepped and swept the stocky boy's legs, sending him tumbling into the lockers with a crash that echoed down the hallway. Tommy struggled to get up, dazed and confused by how quickly the tables had turned. Derek stared in shock as his 2 enforcers lay groaning on the floor. "What the hell? How did you—" "8 years of mixed martial arts training," Marcus said calmly, settling into a fighting stance that every student in the hallway could recognize from movies and TV shows. "I've been holding back because I was taught to avoid violence. But you crossed a line yesterday." Derek looked around wildly, seeing the crowd of students watching with rapt attention. His reputation, his social status, everything depended on not backing down from this scrawny new kid. But looking at Marcus now, seeing the way he moved, the confidence in his stance, the cold focus in his eyes, Derek realized he might have made a terrible mistake. "You think you're tough now?" Derek said, trying to maintain his bravado even as his voice shook slightly. "Fine, let's do this." Derek had size and reach advantages, and he'd been in plenty of fights before, mostly against kids who were too scared or too weak to fight back effectively. But as he threw his first punch, he realized immediately that Marcus was nothing like his previous victims. Marcus ducked the wild swing easily, then drove a precise uppercut into Derek's midsection. As the bigger boy doubled over, Marcus grabbed him by the shoulders and brought his knee up sharply, connecting with Derek's chest and driving the air from his lungs. Derek staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock and pain. "Stay down," Marcus warned. But Derek's pride wouldn't let him quit. He charged forward again, this time trying to tackle Marcus to the ground where his size advantage might help. Marcus sidestepped the tackle and caught Derek in a standing armbar, applying just enough pressure to control the bigger boy without breaking anything. Derek struggled for a moment, then cried out as Marcus increased the pressure. "I could dislocate your shoulder right now," Marcus said quietly, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Is that what you want?" "Let go!" Derek gasped, his tough guy facade crumbling completely. "Let go! You're hurting me!" "You hurt me," Marcus replied. "For 2 months, you've made my life miserable. You humiliated me in front of the entire school. Yesterday, you locked me in a locker for 3 hours. Did you think about whether you were hurting me then?" The crowd was completely silent now, watching this reversal of fortune with fascination. Sarah Martinez had her hands over her mouth, amazed at the transformation in the quiet boy she'd tried to befriend. Other students who had witnessed Marcus's humiliation over the past months stared in disbelief as he dominated the 3 bullies who had seemed so powerful just minutes before. Tommy had managed to get back to his feet and was considering another attack when Marcus's eyes met his. Whatever Tommy saw there made him freeze in place. This wasn't the scared, helpless kid they'd been tormenting. This was someone who could hurt them badly if he chose to. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, still maintaining the armbar on Derek while keeping an eye on the other 2. "You're going to leave me alone from now on. All 3 of you. You're going to find someone else to pick on, or better yet, you're going to stop picking on people entirely." Okay, Derek gasped. "Just let me go." "I'm not finished," Marcus continued. "You're also going to apologize, right here, in front of everyone. You're going to admit that you were wrong to bully me, and you're going to promise that it stops now." Derek's face burned with humiliation, but the pain in his shoulder was growing worse. Around them, dozens of students waited to see how this would end. His reputation was already destroyed. There was no coming back from being dominated so completely by someone he'd dismissed as weak. "I'm sorry," Derek mumbled, barely audible. "Louder," Marcus demanded, applying a bit more pressure, "so everyone can hear you." "I'm sorry," Derek shouted, his voice cracking with pain and embarrassment. "I was wrong to bully you. It stops now." Marcus held the position for a few more seconds, making sure the lesson was clear, then released Derek's arm. The bigger boy stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder and avoiding eye contact with the crowd that had witnessed his humiliation. "That goes for both of you too," Marcus said, turning to Tommy and Jake. Both boys nodded quickly, still too stunned by the rapid reversal to offer any resistance. "Good," Marcus said, straightening his clothes and picking up his backpack. "Then we understand each other." As he walked away, the crowd parted before him like the Red Sea. Students who had ignored him for months now looked at him with newfound respect and curiosity. Some even smiled and nodded as he passed, acknowledging his victory. "Marcus," Sarah called out, jogging to catch up with him, "that was incredible. Where did you learn to fight like that?" "Somewhere else," Marcus replied with a slight smile, "before I came here." The story of Marcus's victory spread through Jefferson High like wildfire. By lunchtime, even students who hadn't witnessed the fight had heard about it. The quiet new kid had taken down 3 bullies single-handedly, and the social dynamics of the school shifted overnight. Derek, Tommy, and Jake found themselves on the receiving end of the whispers and stares they had once inflicted on others. Their reign of intimidation was over, broken by someone they had underestimated completely. Derek's shoulder would heal, but his reputation never would. For Marcus, the change was immediate and profound. Students who had previously ignored him now greeted him in the hallways. Teachers who had been oblivious to his struggles now saw him clearly. He was no longer invisible. He was someone who commanded respect. Most importantly, the bullying stopped, not just against Marcus, but throughout the school. Word spread that there was someone willing to stand up to bullies, someone who wouldn't tolerate cruelty and humiliation. Other students began finding their own courage, inspired by Marcus's example. 3 weeks later, as Marcus sat in the cafeteria with Sarah and several other friends he'd made since the confrontation, he noticed Derek sitting alone at a corner table. The former bully looked smaller somehow, diminished by his defeat and abandonment by fair-weather friends who only respected strength. "Do you feel bad for him?" Sarah asked, following Marcus's gaze. Marcus considered the question carefully. "I feel bad that it came to that," he said finally, "but I don't regret defending myself. Sometimes you have to fight for respect. Sometimes that's the only language bullies understand." He thought about Master Kim's teachings, about using violence only as a last resort. The 3 hours locked in that locker had been his last resort, the moment when patience and restraint had failed to protect him. What happened afterward wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was standing up not just for himself, but for every student who had ever been made to feel small and powerless. As he finished his lunch and prepared for his next class, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed. He was no longer the invisible new kid trying to blend into the shadows. He was someone who had faced his tormentors and emerged victorious, not through cruelty or revenge, but through strength, courage, and the willingness to stand up for what was right. The bell rang, and students began filing out of the cafeteria. Marcus gathered his things and walked confidently toward his next class, no longer afraid of what might be waiting in the hallways. He had learned that respect couldn't be given. It had to be earned. And sometimes earning it required showing others that you were stronger than they believed possible.